Welcome to Diamonds and Dumpster Fires, the show where we talk about finding strength when life falls apart. I'm your host, Melie, and around here, resilience isn't perfection. It's falling flat, getting back up, and maybe laughing about it later. From breakups to breakthroughs, we mix faith, neuroscience, and a little sass to help you rebuild a life that actually feels like yours. Are you ready? Let's go. Hello, resilient ones, and welcome back to Diamonds in Dumpster Fires. Today, we are going to talk about a part of breakups and divorce that we don't discuss very often, and that is that moment when you realize you're getting back out there and you're going to have to trust yourself again. Because I think one of the hardest things about a relationship ending isn't just losing that person you were with, it's questioning your own judgment. You start wondering, why did I stay so long? What did I miss? What if I choose wrong again? And so dating becomes less about meeting someone new and more about learning how to listen to your own discernment. And I'm really excited today about my guest, Justin Smith, who is the creator of the app Cray. He created the app after the end of an 8-year relationship when he realized many warning signs only made sense in hindsight. Instead of just moving on, he wanted to understand why we miss patterns while we're still inside them and how people can recognize them earlier. Today, we are going to be talking about dating after divorce or a breakup, the red flags that people often overlook, and how to rebuild trust in yourself again. So let's dive into it. Justin, welcome to Diamonds and Dumpster Fires.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
I think this is such an important topic because I get emails and messages on social media all the time from listeners who are like, okay, I've been through the divorce. I've done the work on myself. I'm ready to get back out there. I signed up for the apps and it's nuts, or as your app would go, cray out there, right? And it is. I mean, I have my own personal crazy experiences with it. But before we talk a little bit about that, I'd love it if you could give your story so listeners understand a little bit about you and why you developed this app in the first place.
Yeah, for sure. I think my story can be a lesson for a lot of people in terms of anyone can get blindsided by a partner at any point in the relationship. And unfortunately, after an 8-year partnership, we were married for about 2.5 of it. One day I woke up and she had just decided to blow up the marriage finally as part of a kind of long-standing plot to try and get money out of me, essentially, and cause me to have a mental breakdown. So as a result, when I was trying to sort through all the gaslighting and the other issues, I checked myself into a trauma treatment center for 2 months and did a lot of self-discovery and self-work. And in sorting through, kind of trying to understand what had happened, I realized there were a lot of red flags that I missed out on that, I think other people probably miss out on too, unfortunately. And I felt I was in a position to do something about it. So I leaned in heavily to the fact that I wasn't going to just let this be, an event that happened to me. I was going to use it as a purpose to help other people so they didn't end up in a situation like this.
That's great that you were able to use what you went through to help others. I think that's so important and is such a powerful way to heal. You know, not everybody necessarily gets to do that, but I think that finding some way to use what happened for good is a great way to overcome that. Now, I'd love if you could tell us if there was a specific moment when you thought about developing the app, or maybe it was even before that, where you realized, oh, these are the signs that I didn't understand, but now I see them pretty clearly.
I think it's even little stuff that we kind of don't really look at, such as, are they nice and validating to me during conflict? Do they validate my concerns? Something that seems somewhat minor is painting a larger picture that this person doesn't necessarily care about you or isn't invested in a partnership. So, there's a lot of different ones. I put in pretty much every one I could think of. I spent a lot of time on the items that are in the app, and I've gotten great user feedback that, even from people who say, man, I never thought about these before. And I think that's the great thing about the app too, is it forces people to be thoughtful and mindful and present in their relationship and really look at the behavior of their partner in a objective way.
Interesting. And before we get into why dating after a long-term relationship is so hard, I'd love if you could give an overview for listeners, and we will have links below so you can check everything out, but maybe walk through how the app actually works. So a user signs up for Cray and what comes next.
Sure. Well, there's four main features to it that are like the safety tools that I created that I thought were important to evaluating a relationship or a partner. The first one I call the Cray score, which is the red flags that are showing up in the relationship. The next one I call the schemer score, which is items relating to manipulation or deception or financial manipulation. And then I added two other tools that are the catfish check, which is a phone number lookup to make sure that the phone number they're texting you from is a real phone number. And then the other is I call it the background check, but it's really a legal history lookup in the state of their choosing. So the
Interesting.
idea behind it was to create kind of a walled approach to letting someone in, to be closer to you. You got to determine, is this a real person? Are they using a real identity? Are their intentions good? Are they showing signs of major red flags that could harm me or my safety in the relationship? So I tried to really think through all those issues and put everything into the app as much as possible. It's basically helping people learn identification and educating them why those items matter in terms of the safety and the happiness and health of the relationship.
Love that. And that's so great. Honestly, that catfish check would have saved me from some very strange conversations when I first got on the apps after my divorce. I actually just taught a workshop on internet safety and used some of my past app conversations that turned into phone conversations with scammers as examples of what not to do because I got like wrapped up in it. Luckily, I didn't give any money to anybody, but that was the ultimate goal of the whoever was on the other end of that
Well, you always
conversation.
feel foolish afterwards too, is the worst part. We want
Yeah.
to enter dating with this mindset that we're going to be open and accommodating to what the experience is like and getting to meet people and trying our best to approach it with a positive mindset. But, as soon as you step into that environment, online dating, you get reality checked pretty quickly, unfortunately.
You do. Yeah, the first time when I realized, "Oh my goodness, I've been spending weeks talking to a scammer," I felt so much shame over it. Like I should have known, like I should have had some, indicator, but I mean, they're good at what they do, right? But had I looked up the phone number, I'm sure it wouldn't have come up as legit. And so I love that there are tools out there to help folks because now I can spot it a little bit easier. But, yeah, that shame. I actually paused my accounts for several weeks after because I just felt like so dumb. Like, why did you let that happen? And, and that's hard enough. You're already putting yourself out there, but to beat yourself up over something like that makes it even harder.
Well, for sure. And in a situation like that where they're trying to financially manipulate you, it's, very similar to getting held up at gunpoint. The weapon isn't there and they're not in person, but it has that same violating feel. So, speaking to your point, you had to step on the landmine to learn from it. That's the really nice thing about the app is it forces people to kind of go through these questions. And just by going through the questions, they start looking at their relationships a little bit differently and it starts getting baked into their thought process, which is a nice feature of using it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And is that like, are those questions something you would do, like, say, as you're chatting with someone on the app, you'd start filling it out? Or is it more for like after you've met somebody?
Well, since you asked, I actually built it for different ways because, online dating these days, you may never meet the person in person before you decide to date them. You meet them online. So there's two ways that ask the questions, if you've met in person or not. But basically, what you would do is you would fill it out to the best of your knowledge as you're getting to know them. And, revisit it every, couple of weeks or as new information maybe gets noticed by you during the dating process. Because, the snapshot you have in the beginning is much different than 6 months or 12 months as well. Because during that first period, you're meeting their representative. You're not actually meeting the person or seeing their real behavior.
Right. You are meeting the representative, but it's like a heightened version of that. I know I have had so many times where I have been chatting, and this is, bad on me. I've chatted with someone for months before the meetup, and then you meet up and you're like, yeah, no, this isn't going to work, And so I think, yeah, being able to discern stuff, I had to learn again the hard way about things like love bombing. I had somebody I had started chatting with right as my divorce had finalized, and we had not met in person, and I think we were, like, 3 weeks into just chatting. We had like, a couple phone calls, but not an actual meetup, and he told me he loved me, and I was
Oof.
so messed up, like, and so hurt over the divorce that I was like, Like, part of me was mad at myself for feeling like, "Ooh, that's not right. Like, this man doesn't know me." And I was like, "No, but he does. He's been through what you've been through," and there was this war within myself. Luckily, I was like, "No, I'm not comfortable with this." But yeah, I think that is something we can segue into. Like, I think love bombing is probably one of the big red flags that a lot of folks, especially when they're hurting from a divorce or a long-term breakup, end up experiencing. What are some of the tells that someone is heading towards love bombing?
Well, I think love bombing is one of those things that it's so hard to almost resist someone pouring in such attention to you because everyone wants to be loved. And, it starts off gradual and it's kind of like the lobster in the boiling pot of water. At what point does the lobster notice it's getting cooked? With love bombing, I think it's one of those things, if they do it really well and they're sophisticated at it, I don't know that you can necessarily tell unless you're being forced to look at different pieces of the relationship through an app like this, which I think is the helpful piece. Being convinced emotionally to buy into a relationship by someone who's very skilled at pulling on someone's heartstrings. Good people get tricked into diving into a relationship that is an exploitative one, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, it is. And like you said, we all do want to feel loved. And so when somebody, especially maybe if you've been in a situation where you might have been neglected in the past and, didn't hear those words a lot, somebody coming in and saying exactly what you've always longed to hear can be very alluring, and it can be really difficult to pause. So yeah, I love that you have that option. Then people can kind of put in some of this stuff and it's like, I've known this guy 3 weeks but never met in person and he's already saying he loves me. Pretty red flag.
Yeah, and I think it's good to call attention to that. App forcing those, behaviors looked at is the only way that we can protect ourselves from these emotional manipulation plots because it's like you said, there's this black hole in some of us, or I shouldn't call it a black hole, but a deep hole of wanting to be loved or fulfilled, and it makes us susceptible to these kind of plots.
Definitely. And one thing that comes up a lot from folks that listen to the podcast, they'll say, a lot of them have gone through very painful breakups or relationships. This wasn't a mutual decision. A lot of them have been blindsided by it. And they'll say, I don't trust my picker anymore. What advice do you have for somebody who is in that boat? What would you suggest if someone said, I want to date, but I just don't trust myself?
Well, I can speak to that because I'm in that boat right now myself. After what happened to me, I find it very hard to trust people. But I think, the first question people should ask themselves is, am I in a place to date or am I ready to be dating? Because if you haven't gotten over your ex or you're still feeling wounded, then you're going to make the next partner pay for that. And I think that's an unfortunate thing with dating nowadays. Some people don't date with an intention and use dating to kind of supplement, get that dopamine rush from, another person and then just move on to the next dopamine rush. So I think that's one of the challenging things these days is the lack of authenticity too in dating.
Yes, definitely. I would say that and that dopamine rush that you talked about, because I think the apps in particular have set it up in such a way that they are addictive. And so we get addicted to what comes next. It's that anticipation of like, ooh, this person's cool, but who's coming next down the line, right? Like, who could be better? And that's been my experience with the dating apps. I was on them for about 5 years, I guess, and never once, not one time, met somebody who was actually interested in potentially even pursuing a healthy relationship. So I got off of them and I personally just don't do that anymore. But I do know people that are meeting and finding, I think part of it's where I live too. I'm in Southern California. It's kind of a nightmare here.
I think everywhere is a nightmare these days, though, too, because you have this mindset online with a certain population of people that have now kind of usurped this imbalance online where women are in control, where they might use that to make people prove their worth or things like that. There's just this very usury side to dating these days. And the apps don't even, promote you evaluating your partner based on the content of their character. It literally is only surface level. Their pics, can they, form a sentence in their bio and let me swipe on them? And so you're kind of setting yourself up for failure because no relationship foundation with, hooking up or superficial qualities is going to last or have a high relationship quality.
Right. Yeah, and I think that even people that I've met who have found good relationships from the apps, a lot of those came like years ago. So I'm almost wondering if anybody is meeting anybody in real life anymore, like in a positive way from the apps, but that remains to be seen, I guess.
One thing I also think is the problem with apps too is that most well-adjusted, healthy people will have relationships that they can lean on to meet new people. And so I think that is another piece of it is that, the people that are going to be on the apps might be people that have issues that get in the way of kind of normal dating relationships. Some of those
Mhm.
are easily explainable, like they might have a very busy job. Others might be, well, the person's pretty nuts and no one will tolerate being around them. So, it's total extremes of it.
Exactly. Now, I do want to go back to one thing that you did say when we were talking about if someone's ready for dating yet and they have to kind of assess that. I know you said, are you over your ex? Do you think having closure from that previous relationship is required before someone goes into a new dating relationship?
I don't know about the word closure, but I think that the wounds from that relationship need to be healed. Like, for example, my ex did not really give me much attention or validation during my relationship. And so that really is a underlying theme that I need to, come to terms with. And, so I'd lean heavily on self-love to kind of counterbalance that and work on getting to know myself and date myself again. So, in the context of being ready to date, that's kind of what I'm talking about is are the fights or conflicts from your previous relationship still things that sit with you, still wounds that are festering that show up in maybe how you look at the opposite sex or, your desire to have a relationship or not with them?
Can you share a few of those other red flags that people might not recognize early on?
Well, the one that I like to always mention is the unkind during conflict,
Mhm.
because I think you can tell a lot about someone by how they approach conflicts with their partner. Do they validate their partner's feelings? Do they blow them off? Do they try and force the partner to submit to their worldview? You really want to look at how conflict and communication are handled in the relationship. I feel like those are the two big cornerstones of a healthy relationship.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And yeah, in communication too, I think a lot of times we don't necessarily notice like stonewalling where somebody is avoiding the conflict because sometimes that can feel like, oh, they just don't want to be in conflict, but they're actually just walling themselves off and not willing to talk about a true issue. That could actually be a red flag being disguised as kindness, right?
Yeah, and I mean, anyone who's not willing to talk about specific topics, is that a partner you want to be, in a relationship with? I mean, for me personally, I want the partner to be able to talk about anything with me. And if we do face a conflict, no matter how big it is, we can talk through it and figure out a solution. And we're both oriented that the mindset is about finding solutions for the relationship to continue, not about who's right or who said what or, which message was sent on what day. Those are kind of distractions from what the real issue is.
Now, when you look at the app, have you noticed specific patterns that keep popping up? Like this particular red flag tends to happen the most in dating after a breakup or something of that nature?
I'll be honest, I haven't looked at individual assessment data. I'm trying to not pay attention too much to how people are using it because I want people to have a assumption of privacy because they're evaluating relationships and it's pretty personal to most people. So I haven't looked at it that way. The feedback I have gotten though was that it helped provide clarity to someone who was in a situation where their own mind was coming up with reasons to dislike their partner and they weren't necessarily based on reality. It was just their own issues, popping up and kind of grabbing the steering wheel.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. And I think that is easy to do when you've been in a situation where, in my instance, I was with somebody who really just didn't want to be with me and made it very clear. And so I am like hyper vigilant. When it comes to analyzing this stuff, would you say that most people should trust their intuition, or is that something that kind of we need to recalibrate?
Well, I think it depends on the person, of course, because there's certain people out there, like myself. I have PTSD, a lot of trauma. I was molested as a kid, different things like that. And so my picker was broken for a long time because I was surrounded by people who didn't validate me, who didn't support me, and it created issues that bled into my life. So I think there are certain people that their picker is broken and they need to reevaluate how they go about seeking out relationships. Are they, looking to repeat the patterns of a previous abusive, partner or their parent that abandoned them and didn't give them enough attention growing up? How is their story, being played out in their present day? And I think that's really where the self study has to come in. There's this saying in DBT that depending on where you live in the world, you may have a completely different viewpoint on an event. DBT teaches you that there are no values on events, that you are placing a value on it yourself. And the same goes for any instance in your life. Like your mindset and the way you look at things is shaping how you're going to handle it. And so it's very important that the value you're placing on things is accurate or at least based in reality.
Yeah, that's a good point because, yeah, sometimes when we have been involved in situations where we have experienced some kind of abuse or bad relationship after bad relationship, we can then start to view even a potentially good relationship through that negative lens. Someone else might look at it and say, oh, this person is really great. But if we're skewed that way, we might start to think, ooh, but they said this and maybe they meant that. I know I have to catch myself all the time with those automatic negative thoughts when I'm getting to know someone. If they say something like, I'll just share a kind of a funny one. This was actually just a friend. We went out to dinner and he asked me if I still worked out. And I stewed on that for like 2 weeks. And I never, he'll probably hear it now in this because I don't know if he listens, but I was like, what does he mean by that? Do I not look like I work out anymore? Do I, and I just downward spiraled. And it was just a question. We hadn't seen each other in months and he was just curious. It was something we always talked about. So that, and I use myself as an example for folks because I hope that you'll hear that. And I know a lot of people will be like, that's ridiculous. But maybe you have your own thing, right? That's like just as ridiculous or maybe just make you feel good about where you're at. Am I crazy?
Well, that's the tough thing about, us as humans though, right? We have this sense of wanting to belong. And so a statement like that, we can apply a lot of meaning to it when it may have just been an innocuous statement that he was making because, we want to be accepted, we want to belong and we want to feel good about ourselves. So I totally get it. I get in thought loops too. It's something I've learned to combat with playing music because you can't have negative thoughts fill in your head if you have words from a song filling it instead.
Yeah.
So I totally get it. It's just one of those things. I think that goes back to the are you ready to date? If a comment like that might change your viewpoint a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. Now, I will say probably 3 years ago, the minute I got home, I probably would have texted, "What did you mean by that?" and made myself look like totally crazy. I would have definitely rated high on the Cray factor back then. But now I'm like, "Okay, this is just what's coming up. This is human that you're feeling anxious about this, but why?" And I broke it down for myself, kind of reframed the thought. Could it be that you guys always talked about this? It was something you had in common and he was just making conversation. Yes, that was actually what it was,
It's funny the things our brain does to us, right?
Totally.
We just want to live in a calm, peaceful, happy world, and it has a way of messing with that sometimes.
It does. Absolutely. Now, one thing I know a lot of folks struggle with, and they hear it all the time, and they're like, I know I need to have boundaries, but what does that mean? So, if you could explain when it comes to noticing these red flags or starting to get to know someone, are there particular boundaries that you suggest for folks as they are leaning into dating a bit more?
Yeah, man, you're hitting on all the important topics I realized for myself. Yeah, boundaries are huge. For me, I never had them with the people I loved and the people in my life. And it started creating problems because I would overextend myself and then get resentful for putting in so much work and maybe not getting acknowledgement. And there's different ways that can show up. If you don't speak up a boundary to your partner and then they overstep it and you're secretly resentful underneath, that's not going to be helpful to the relationship either. And I think most people respect a person who has boundaries because people don't respect someone they can walk all over. They want to know that that person has a firm belief in their value set or what they'll tolerate and what they won't.
Yeah, Definitely. And I think that a lot of times, if you are somebody who hasn't maybe had boundaries, it can feel scary to set those. But setting boundaries, like you said, people respect someone who has boundaries. What are some boundaries that someone may start to set up front? Let's say it's a woman who was married for 15 years and is now on the apps, just starting to chat with people, and people are texting her all the time. What are some good, solid boundaries that don't feel like boundaries for the sake of it, but that actually can protect her as she's getting to know these men?
Yeah, I would say protecting her information, her location, her social medias at first until they get to a point where you start feeling comfortable with that location or information that can be tracked or someone, if they wanted to stalk them, could utilize. And even, boundaries around your time, because a lot of men will want to try and hijack the time to ensure they're blocking out other men or whatever else. So, I try and look for, is the person respectful? Are they treating me with respect? Are they paying attention to me? That kind of stuff. And I think, having boundaries in place that you have a certain expectation of how people will treat you will be helpful too, because that then creates a firm like cutoff. Like, okay, they did this. I don't tolerate people that do that. I'm not going to date them. So I'm going to end this.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I will say, definitely protecting your personal information is so important. I know this was years and years and years ago, well before I was married, but I had given a very short stint to Match.com when it was a website. So I'm dating myself. But I met somebody on there that I went out with one time who I just felt very uncomfortable with. However, in the course of the conversation, apparently, I don't even remember doing it, but I'm sure I did. I mentioned where I worked. I then told this man I was not interested in going out again, but thanked him for, his time when he had reached back out. And about 3 days later, he showed up at my place of
Oof.
work. And he's standing in the front room there, and nobody knew what to do. Luckily, my boss at the time was very cool, and he went out and had a conversation and told him to leave. But it was scary. And I think even more so now, that was like 18, 19 years ago. And so nowadays, with, if someone has your cell phone number, they can, maybe find out where you work. So do you suggest, and I know this kind of goes against maybe the catfish thing, but for women in particular, using like a Google number or some other kind of way to connect at first?
Yeah, as much as the catfish check is a part of the tool set, I do believe that in the beginning, when you're first texting people, it makes sense to use a texting app. But once you've determined that that person is somewhat safe, I think that's up to the person. But I also think that sharing your last name is probably not a good idea. Or information like that that could help the person Google you or use ChatGPT to look you up. You really want to hold all your personal information as close to your chest as possible until you decide to portion it out at the appropriate times. I think that women have, as you experienced, a much bigger safety issue than men, for physical well-being. And that's why I recommend that with men. I think the issues are much more, deceptive or financial manipulation type issues online.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that's right. And one dating coach that I listen to sometimes said, it's always good to chat on the app and then set a public place to meet. Go and meet that person as quickly as you can rather than getting stuck in that trap of texting all the time. Maybe meet at a coffee shop somewhere very public. And then from there, if you like the person, it seems like somebody who might be a good fit, then that's when you both exchange numbers. That seemed like a reasonable way to handle it to me.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. I don't know that I agree with the rushing to meet as quickly as possible piece, because I do
Okay.
believe that that can be a manipulation tactic for schemers, rushing to meet so they can, create some sort of upheaval in the plans or things like that. But
Okay.
I do think that, that's a personal preference, because if you're being mindful and intentional about your dating and you don't want to waste your time, I could see that being, a tactic as well. But I think that's reserved for maybe the people who are both very intentional about wanting to find something serious and both are, on the same page very clearly.
I would agree with that for sure, as I have experienced myself. And I don't understand exactly because they're not necessarily scammers. I've talked to people for months at a time, and they make no mention of getting together. And I don't understand if there's a scam coming down the line, or is this just somebody who's bored and wants, I've had friends say, oh, they're probably just married and chat with you when they're free. Do you have any insight into like what is going on for these folks that want to talk for months at a time before even talking about meeting up?
They could be people with trauma, or they could be people who are really wanting to vet out the person they spend time with, or maybe they lack the confidence to meet in person. It's hard to say because there could be a ton of explanations. Maybe they're using outdated pictures. It really just depends on what the warning signs are that are popping up. And that's what makes it so hard to figure these things out sometimes is these people play the angle, different ways that make it challenging to determine what they're trying to go for. I will say that I personally am one of those people that wait a little bit before I meet someone, but that is because I've had some bad experiences with scammers or, people trying to do something inappropriate.
I could see how that would definitely cause you to want to wait. Yeah, I had one guy I talked to for a really long time, and we had hit it off pretty well as far as like chatting on text mostly. We also had phone calls, even FaceTime. So like it was definitely the person, that I was
Hmm.
talking to. And then he would set dates with me and then cancel them like day of, sometimes night before, but usually day of. And oh, this emergency came up, or oh, I got called into work, and it happened so many times, and I'm like, I never understood what happened there because it seemed, I don't know, like that one really baffled me because I'm like, why did, and it happened so many times, and then finally it just sort of fizzled out and never heard from him again.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, if someone does that, more than once, then that's the end for me. I can understand something coming up, but to me, that shows a huge lack of authenticity in their intentions. And it could have been he just wanted the attention. I mean, it could be that he was married and couldn't meet. I mean, there's a lot of things behind the scenes that could explain it. There's this funny saying I heard a long time ago that is, "Don't try and understand crazy." Because we could spend a lot of time trying to figure out why people do certain things, and there's just going to be a certain population and portion of the population that there's no way to figure out why they're doing things because I don't even think they know why they're doing it.
Right. No, that makes total sense. Definitely. Now, what would you say to the listener who they maybe have given the dating apps a try? They've crashed and burned. I think we all have a bit with them, and they are embarrassed. They're on the fence. Should I get out there again or not? What would you say to that person?
I would say getting out there is important just from a socialization standpoint. I mean, we as humans need to be social animals. If they're, I understand there being discomfort with the apps because they're just crazy now. So I would recommend lean into maybe some hobbies you like to do. Lean into those as a way to meet people because then you'll start meeting people who are like you and have common interests, and you may end up meeting someone to date through that. But in the meantime, you're building a hobby for yourself. You're building a support system of people who like to see you showing up at this place. And so it creates some healthy lifestyle habits that will lead to them being fulfilled and possibly finding a new partner.
Absolutely. I get people that will write to me and say, I want to join a group, but where would I be a good place for me to meet someone? And they're sort of strategizing where to meet someone. And my thing is, I join groups and events and things that I find interesting. Some of those things are primarily just groups of females because I knit, I do things, crafts. Doesn't mean I won't meet someone though, because maybe the girl sitting next to me knitting away might have a brother or a best friend who's a guy. You never know. So I always tell people do what you enjoy, and then you'll meet people. The love of your life might not, probably won't be sitting across from you at that pottery class, but you don't ever know who you might meet. Just expanding your social network and getting to know new folks is always a great thing.
Yeah, and one thing I've talked to my therapist about is those situations, going into those situations with the mindset of finding a partner is doing yourself a disservice. Because really, you should be going into those situations looking for something fun to do, some people to meet, to live a happier life. And that other piece of it will just happen when it happens.
Right.
And so, because if you go there, only wanting to meet someone, what's going to happen when you get there and there's no one to meet? You're going to beat yourself up. You're going to, all of a sudden start looking down on yourself and feel like you did something wrong because there wasn't someone there. And it just creates this negative cycle versus going somewhere and just having fun and doing an activity you enjoy.
Yeah, exactly. What would you say? I know we talked a lot about red flags and all these things to look out for, but what would you say are the top 1 to 3 underrated green flags that people might tend to miss?
So it's funny you asked that. I'm actually coming out with an addition to the app that I'm going to call the Bay Score, BAE, like Cray Score, Bay Score. And it's the qualities to look for in a partner because I feel that, while the safety piece was needed, I also needed to show people kind of what to look for. So the main categories of that, there's 6 of them, are emotional responsiveness, communication and repair, emotional security and self regulation, accountability and growth, effort and relational investment, and then mutual respect and autonomy. So those are kind of the overarching areas that I think that are the hallmarks of a healthy relationship. Because if you don't have a partner that does those things, you're going to be feeling unfulfilled to a pretty deep extent, I would say.
Yeah, I love that. I think for those of us who maybe haven't had a very good relationship in the past, I mean, I had a long relationship in the past, but it was, marked with a lot of red flags that I didn't notice and on my end too. I don't put it all on him at all. I think some of us, as we come out of these relationships, we can recognize where we were the red flag and start to become more of a green flag ourselves, right? As we learned, we go through therapy, as we work on ourselves. But I do think that for a lot of people, as they are getting out on the apps, they've heard of all the bad stories. They have this mindset of, I'm going to find all the red flags right up front. And they might actually miss somebody who is a green flag in that. And I will give an example. Someone reached out to me and said, "Oh, I don't think, this guy is a good fit for me because we've gone out 3 times and he has not talked about exclusivity yet." So obviously he's totally not into it. And I'm like, could be a green flag that he's taking his time. That was an interesting one because that actually is maybe a green flag that he is assessing and respecting you enough to not rush you to make a decision, to be exclusive.
Yeah, and I feel like also there's this thing where people want their partner to be obsessed with them as if it's like this ideal, thing to achieve. In reality, that's a red flag. Like you don't want someone consuming your time, hitting you up all the time, asking what you're doing, and putting such a weight and burden on you. So yeah, it's funny how, red flags are turned into green flags or vice versa sometimes by people who just want their selfish needs met for a specific reason.
Definitely. I saw actually a funny meme about that. Said somebody someday will be obsessed with you. It'll probably be a dog, but that's the only way that's actually healthy, right?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. My dog, thankfully, has been by my side through the worst of this during the 2 years, and there's something to be said for having a dog that's obsessed with you and loves you. Because during those times when you need him, he's there.
Now, as we wrap up here, Justin, I just want to thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing all your wisdom. And I'd love to know, what is something right now that you're excited about or that's bringing you joy?
Well, I was accepted to the University of Tampa Entrepreneurship Center. They
Nice.
are hosting Cray as an incubator company there. So I've gotten to be on the campus, University of Tampa, and see, kids getting excited about the app and wanting to be involved. So that's bringing me a lot of joy, just being engaged and working with younger people, helping them, understand the business and get involved.
I love that. That's so great. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Listeners, I just want to let you know we will have links to the Cray app down in the show notes, so please do check that out. And of course, if you've listened to this episode and you think of that friend who is navigating the dating apps or dating after breakup or divorce, please, please, please share this episode with them. We'd love to get more people looking for the green flags and finding those red flags early and avoiding them. Thank you again, Justin, for being here today.
Of course. Thanks for having me. I'm grateful that you could help me get my story out and hopefully save some people from some trauma.
Thanks for listening to Diamonds and Dumpster Fires. If today reminded you that resilience is a practice, not a personality trait, you're in the right place. Keep showing up, keep rebuilding, and don't forget, even diamonds start as pressure and mess. For more faith-filled encouragement and real-life tools to help you heal and grow, check out the show notes for some free resources and ways to stay connected. See you next time.